Lonely cowboy rescues deaf girl sold for whiskey. Then she whispered something shocking. In 1889, the wind howled across the barren plains as dusk settled over the frontier town of Dry Creek. Dust spiraled through the wooden alleys, carrying with it the scent of stale whiskey and broken promises. Inside the saloon, laughter turned to silence. A frail girl, barefoot, bruised, and no older than 17, stood beside her drunk father. Her eyes were hollow, her silence louder than any scream. She couldn't hear the cruel deal being made, but she could feel it. 2 bottles of rye, the man slurred, pushing her forward. She ain't worth more, she don't talk and don't listen. Useless. The bartender hesitated. The onlookers didn't. They jeered, mocked. One man even raised a hand to bid, as if she were cattle. Then came the sound of boots. Slow, deliberate. A tall figure stepped from the shadows, coat dusty, hat pulled low. His name was Jesse Callahan, a rancher known more for his silence than his kindness. He hadn't spoken to anyone in town in weeks, not since the fire took his wife and boy. He looked at the girl. She didn't flinch, didn't cry, just stared into the floor. Jesse reached into his coat, pulled out a coin pouch, and dropped it on the bar. "She's coming with me," he said in a voice like dry thunder. "Can't return her," the father laughed, staggering. "She's deaf." Jesse didn't even blink. So am I, in all the ways that matter. With a final nod, he led her out into the fading light. 2 broken souls walking toward something neither of them yet understood. Long before Jesse Callahan walked into that saloon, he was a different man. 6 years ago, his ranch thrived on 300 acres of golden prairie grass. His wife, Lila, used to say the sun always seemed to rise a little softer over their land. They had a son, Micah, barely 7, who rode ponies and chased butterflies like time would never end. But everything did end. One bitter November night when a barn fire, sparked by a lightning storm, swallowed his family whole. Jesse never forgave himself. He buried them on the North Ridge, beside a cottonwood tree. Then he stopped speaking to God, to neighbors, even to himself. The house stood quiet. The rocking chair never moved again. The porch stayed swept, not for cleanliness, but because no one ever stepped on it. He went to town only for supplies. He avoided people, and people learned to avoid him. They whispered about the ghost rancher who once had a heart, now turned to ash. 70 miles east of Dry Creek, another story was unraveling. Her name was Clara. She was born to silence. The doctor said it was a fever, something from infancy that robbed her of sound. But it didn't rob her of spirit. She learned to read lips, to mimic words. Her mother used to brush her hair and hum lullabies while she watched Clara try to speak. Her father, Henry, once a decent farmer, took to drinking after his crops failed. Her mother's death sealed the darkness in. Clara stopped trying to speak when she was 12. No one listened. No one cared. Her father blamed her, called her cursed. He sold off furniture first, then the horse, then his daughter. The day he dragged her into Dry Creek, Clara knew something bad would happen. She couldn't hear the cruel laughter or the slurs thrown her way, but she could see the twisted faces, the way lips curled around words that hurt. She tried to run once. He struck her, and then a stranger stepped between her and that pain. A man who didn't smile, who didn't ask questions, who didn't look at her like she was broken. He simply nodded and reached out his hand. That night, as the stars blinked alive above the quiet prairie, Jesse rode slow, with Clara behind him on the saddle. She didn't ask where they were going. She just held on. He didn't say a word. Not yet. And neither of them knew that what they both thought was the end was actually the beginning. The trail back to Jesse's ranch was long and quiet. The horses' hooves clopped against the dry dirt path, echoing beneath the vast, open sky. The girl behind him, thin, shaking slightly, her arms wrapped loosely around his waist, hadn't made a sound. Not a sniffle, not a breath out of place. Just silence. But Jesse understood silence. When they arrived at the homestead, the world looked abandoned. The porch was weathered, the windows dusty. No sign of life but the creaking barn door swaying in the wind. He dismounted and turned to help her down, but Clara had already slipped off the horse on her own. She didn't look up, only clutched the small cloth satchel tied to her waist. A comb, a broken button, and a folded photograph of her mother. Jesse gestured to the house and opened the door. No words, just a nod. Inside, the kitchen still smelled faintly of pine oil and burnt coffee. A pot sat cold on the iron stove. Dust danced in sunbeams, slicing through the curtains. Jesse lit a lantern and set it on the table. He motioned toward the guest room, once his son's room. The door had been shut for years. Now it opened with a creak that seemed to echo into memory. Clara stepped inside, hesitating only to glance at the small bed and the rocking horse in the corner. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper. Stars and moons, hand-drawn in places by a child long gone. She turned to Jesse, opened her mouth slightly, and then closed it again. She lowered her head in thanks. He simply tipped his hat and stepped away. Over the next few days, a fragile rhythm emerged. Clara rose early and swept the porch before Jesse even left his room. She mended a torn curtain in the kitchen, washed the chipped dishes with cold well water. She found peace in work. It kept her from thinking. Jesse watched her quietly, not like a man watching a stranger, but like someone trying to remember how to care again. He left a warm coat hanging on the back of the chair one cold morning. She folded it and left it neatly on the table. The next day, he placed it closer to her side of the room. She wore it without a word. Clara tried to speak once, mouthing "thank you" in the reflection of the kitchen window. But her voice came out broken, unused for so long. Still, Jesse saw it. One evening, she stood outside, watching the sun set over the prairie. Her hair caught the light like fire. Jesse walked up, handed her a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was a worn leather-bound book. Basic sign language. She looked at him, stunned. He pointed to himself, then made a simple sign. Name? Her eyes filled with tears. She raised her hand, fingers shaky, and spelled out Clara. He nodded, then signed Jesse. That night something shifted. They didn't need sound to speak. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was shared. Days passed, then weeks. Clara found joy in small things. Drying clothes in the wind, baking cornbread with the flour Jesse never used, and sitting under the cottonwood tree where 2 unmarked stones rested quietly in the soil. She knew not to ask. He knew she understood. They began to eat together in the evenings. Jesse even smiled once, just a little, when she signed more salt with exaggerated flair. She mimed a dramatic chef, and he let out the smallest, gravelly laugh. That laugh? It was the first sound in years that made Clara feel safe. But even peace on the prairie couldn't keep the world away forever. One morning, while tending to the fence line, Jessie found a rusted tin nailed to the post. Inside was a crumpled note from the sheriff's office in town. Girl's father wants her back. Says you stole her. Jessie's jaw tightened. Clara saw the note later that day. Her face went pale. She dropped the bowl she was holding. It shattered, just like the safety she'd started to believe in. She ran out into the yard. Jessie followed. She was trying to speak, lips moving, but the sound tangled and broken. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She reached out and signed furiously. Don't make me go back. Please. I'll work. I'll stay outside. I'll be quiet. Jessie didn't say a word. He walked up to her, gently touched her shoulder, and then signed slowly. This is your home now. You're not going anywhere. She stared at him for a long moment, then collapsed into his arms. That was the first time she let herself cry, and the first time Jessie held someone again. The peaceful days on the ranch were growing scarce. Word spread through Dry Creek like wildfire. The townsfolk whispered behind closed doors and at the market stalls. The ghost rancher had taken in the deaf girl sold for whiskey. But what did that mean for the town's reputation? For the safety of their own families? At the general store, old Mrs. Harlan leaned close to the clerk and hissed, I don't trust that girl, or that man, bringing trouble to our door. Others nodded, eyes narrowed, casting wary glances toward the distant ranch. One afternoon, Jessie rode into town with Clara walking silently beside him. The sun beat down mercilessly, dust swirling around their boots. At the saloon, the bartender spat out, That's no place for a girl like her. You're asking for trouble, Jessie. Jessie didn't argue. He just tipped his hat and said, She's under my protection. But protection was harder to come by than Jessie had hoped. Clara felt the cold stares and heard the whispers. The children she passed crossed the street. The shopkeepers locked doors a little tighter when she entered. She tried to speak, to ask questions, but words failed her. Her world was shrinking. Then, one night, a group of rough men, led by a burly man named Frank, known for trouble, showed up at the ranch. Your father wants to see you, Frank sneered at Clara. Jessie stepped forward, voice low but steady. She stays here. You'll not touch her. Frank laughed, a cruel, dark sound. We'll see about that. The men left threats hanging in the air like smoke. Days passed. Clara grew quieter, retreating into herself. Jessie noticed her hands trembling as she cooked. Her eyes, once fierce and bright, now clouded with fear. Then came the fever. She woke shivering, drenched in sweat. Jessie's heart pounded as he searched the medicine chest, desperate for something to ease her pain. In the dead of night, he held her close, whispering silent promises he could barely believe himself. I won't let them take you. Not ever. But the world outside was relentless. The sheriff arrived the next morning with a warrant to return Clara to her father. Jessie stood tall, defiant. She's under my care. You'll have to come through me. The sheriff hesitated. The town's murmurs grew louder. Clara, weak but determined, signed one word. Stay. Her hands shook. Jessie looked into her eyes and made a decision that would change everything. The battle for Clara's future was just beginning. The night was thick with tension. Jessie sat by the flickering firelight, his fingers tracing the worn leather of the rifle resting by his side. Outside, the wind carried distant voices. Neighbors divided, some sympathizing, others condemning. Clara lay on the cot, pale but awake. Her breaths came shallow, the fever still burning beneath her skin. Jessie took her hand in his, their fingers intertwining with a strength neither had known in years. She looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with a secret she hadn't dared to share. Slowly, hesitantly, Clara parted her lips. A faint whisper escaped. "Jessie." The single word broke through the silence like a bolt of lightning. Jessie's breath caught. She spoke. The sound was fragile, a ghost of a voice, but it was real. Tears filled his eyes. He pulled her close, whispering back, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Days later, the town's mood began to shift. Clara's courage to speak, even in whispers, sparked a change. People saw her not as the girl sold like property, but as a brave soul fighting for a new life. Jessie, once the lonely cowboy, found himself no longer isolated. Neighbors offered help, respect replacing suspicion. Together, they rebuilt not just a home, but hope. That night, under a sky full of stars, Clara smiled softly. She traced Jessie's name in the dirt with her finger, then looked up. "I love you," she signed and whispered. Jessie smiled, the weight of years lifting from his shoulders. "You don't have to whisper that to me." Their story was one of broken silence, broken chains, and love born from the ashes. Years passed like the slow turning of seasons over Jessie's ranch. The once lonely homestead now brimmed with life, wild flowers blooming along the fence line, laughter echoing through the fields, and a small wooden porch swing that creaked softly in the breeze. Clara and Jessie had built more than a home. They built a family. She taught herself to speak more clearly, her voice growing stronger each day. Jessie learned sign language too, their conversations filled with shared smiles and whispered words. The town's old wounds healed over time, replaced by respect and friendship. One summer evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara stood on the porch, watching the sky paint itself in shades of orange and purple. Jessie came up behind her, wrapping a protective arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him and signed softly, "Home." He smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Yes," he whispered back. "Home." Two broken souls, once lost in silence and sorrow, had found love and belonging beneath the endless western sky. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt Western love stories, and leave a comment below telling us what you thought. Your support means the world to us.